Growing up, my grandmother used to tell me stories about restless spirits wandering the world, seeking closure. I always thought they were just that, stories. But now, as I sit here, I know better. It all started a few weeks ago. I had just returned to my childhood home after years of being away. It had been sitting empty for a while, collecting dust and memories. I didn't want to come back, but I had no choice. The house needed repairs, and I had to either sell it or live in it. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a weight in the air. Not like something was watching me, but like the house itself was holding its breath. As I wandered through the halls, everything felt eerily familiar. The faded wallpaper, the old wooden floors that creaked under my feet. And then I saw it. On the mantelpiece in the living room, a framed photo of my Uncle Mark. I hadn't been particularly close to him, but we had shared a few conversations during family gatherings. He was the quiet one, always standing at the edge of things, observing. When I was a child, I remember being slightly unnerved by him, though I couldn't explain why. That night, after settling in, I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamt of my uncle. In the dream, he stood at the foot of my bed, watching me. His eyes were dark, and his face expressionless. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Then, without warning, he pointed toward the hallway, and I woke up in a cold sweat. The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness that feels unnatural. I sat up, trying to shake off the lingering unease from the dream, but then I heard it. The unmistakable creak of footsteps in the hallway. My heart stopped. For a moment, I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make noise after all. But then I heard it again. This time it was closer. I held my breath, straining to hear any other sounds, but there was only silence. I told myself to be rational, to go check, but every nerve in my body screamed to stay put. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself out of bed, grabbing my phone as a makeshift flashlight. The hallway was empty, or at least it appeared to be, but there was a feeling, a presence. I could feel it, and then the cold hit me, a deep, bone-chilling cold that had no business being in the house on a warm autumn night. That's when I saw it. At the end of the hallway, standing in front of the old family portrait, was my uncle. He looked just as he did in my dream. Still silent, his eyes empty of life. I wanted to scream, but fear had taken hold of my throat. He raised his hand and pointed again, just like in the dream. This time he pointed at the attic door. I didn't move, couldn't. He remained there for what felt like hours. But then, as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. No fading away or vanishing into mist. He was just gone. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor, my back against the wall, staring at the attic door. I knew I had to go up there. Whatever he wanted, whatever unfinished business he had, it was in that attic. But the thought of going up there terrified me more than anything I had ever felt. The next day, the house felt different. Lighter, almost, as if whatever had appeared the night before had taken some of the heaviness with it. But the attic loomed in the back of my mind like a dark cloud. I couldn't shake the image of my uncle standing at the end of the hallway, pointing toward it. I spent the morning avoiding it, trying to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a dream. Something was wrong. Something that involved my uncle. And the attic held the answer. By the afternoon, I couldn't avoid it any longer. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a heavy feeling in my chest, I stood in front of the attic door. My hand trembled as I reached for the old brass handle. The door creaked open with a sound that sent shivers down my spine. The attic smelled of dust and forgotten things. Boxes stacked high, covered in years of neglect, filled the room. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but old furniture and boxes of belongings. But then, At the far end of the attic, I saw it. A small wooden chest. I had never seen that chest before. It was out of place. It was too new compared to the other worn-out items in the attic. Something compelled me to approach it. My hands shook as I knelt in front of it, my heart racing in my chest. With a deep breath, I opened the chest. Inside were old family photos, letters, and documents, nothing particularly unusual. But at the very bottom, there was something else. An envelope yellowed with age, addressed to my uncle. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The letter inside was brief, written in my grandmother's handwriting. "Mark, you need to tell them. It's time they knew the truth." I stared at the letter, confusion and dread washing over me. Tell who? Tell them what? The letter's cryptic words echoed in my mind, heavy with a mystery I hadn't known existed. What truth did my uncle need to tell? And why hadn't he? A chill ran down my spine, and suddenly, the attic felt oppressive. The air was thick, and the shadows seemed darker, pressing in around me. I stuffed the letter into my pocket and stood up, backing away from the chest as if it might lurch toward me at any moment. I needed answers, and I knew the only place to find them was with my uncle. As I turned to leave the attic, the door slammed shut. The sharp sound echoed through the room, and my flashlight flickered in my hand. Panic gripped me as I rushed to the door, tugging at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. And then, from behind me, I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper. "You weren't supposed to find it." I spun around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly across the attic walls. For a moment, everything was still, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, my uncle, standing in the far corner, half hidden in the shadows, his eyes hollow and accusing. "You weren't supposed to find it," he repeated, his voice low and guttural, like the wind through the trees on a stormy night. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. What truth? What did she mean? I stammered, clutching the flashlight like it was a lifeline. His figure didn't move, but his eyes bore into me. "You shouldn't have come back here," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "There are things better left." I swallowed hard, trying to gather my thoughts. "Tell me what you're hiding," I demanded, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound brave. His lips curled into a grimace, a twisted, sad imitation of a smile. "It's too late now," he whispered. "The truth is in your—" Before I could respond, a sharp pain shot through my chest. I gasped, clutching my side, and for a moment, the room spun. The shadows seemed to twist and swirl around me, and in the midst of it all, my uncle vanished. I stumbled toward the door, pushing it open this time with surprising ease. I nearly fell down the narrow stairs, my body weak and trembling. My head was spinning, my chest tight with dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just unlocked something I wasn't ready to face. The house was quiet again, but I could feel it pulsing with something dark and unseen, as if the walls themselves were alive with secrets. The letter burned in my pocket. I needed to know more. Faces of distant relatives stared back at me from the yellowed pages, smiling in moments frozen in time. But it wasn't until I reached the very last page of the oldest album that I found something that stopped my heart. A photograph, half hidden behind another. My grandmother, much younger, standing beside a man who looked familiar. Too familiar. It was my father. But it wasn't just that. The man standing next to her wasn't my grandfather. It was my uncle. But that made no sense. My uncle and my father weren't the same age. They couldn't have been. And then, I saw the date scrawled at the bottom of the photo. 1952. My father wasn't born until 1960. But there, in that photograph from 8 years earlier, he stood, smiling, with the same dark eyes I had seen so many times growing up. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. How could this be? How could my uncle and my father be the same person? I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew this was part of the truth my grandmother had tried to bury. There was something wrong with my family, something that had been kept from me my whole life. And now it had come for me. For days I avoided the attic and the photo albums. I couldn't make sense of what I had seen, and I was too terrified to look any deeper. The feeling in the house grew worse with each passing hour, the air thick with tension. Every night I felt eyes on me. Every creak, every groan of the house made my heart race. And then, one night, I woke to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but as the whispers grew louder, I realized they were coming from the hallway. My uncle's voice, soft and insistent. "It's time you knew." I threw the covers off and crept toward the door. The house was completely dark, but the whispers guided me like a beacon. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw him again, my uncle, standing in the same place as before in front of the attic door. But this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood my father, or the man I thought was my father. His face was pale, eyes sunken and dead, just like my uncle's. "Come," they whispered in unison. "You need to see." Against my better judgment, I followed them. The attic door swung open, and I climbed the stairs, my body moving on its own, as if I were being pulled by an invisible force. When I reached the top, the room was different. The chest was gone, replaced by something else, a large mirror. In the reflection, I didn't see myself. I saw them, my uncle and my father, their faces twisted with anger and pain. But there was something else, too. Something in their eyes that terrified me. Because in the reflection, I looked like them. "We're not who you think we are," my uncle said, his voice a hollow echo. "And neither are you." The room spun, the walls closing in. Couldn't breathe. "What are you talking about?" I choked out. My father stepped forward, his hand reaching toward me through the glass. "It's in your blood," he said softly, almost tenderly. "The curse has been passed down through generations. Now it's your turn." My mind reeled as the pieces began to fall into place. The hidden photos, the letter, the whispers. The curse wasn't just some story. It was real. And now it was mine. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was my father's hand, pulling me into the mirror. When I woke, I was no longer in the attic. I was somewhere else, somewhere dark and endless, surrounded by shadows of my family, those who had come before me. They stared at me, their eyes empty, their faces twisted in agony. And I knew I was one of them now, bound to the curse, trapped in the cycle, prisoner of my bloodline. And there was no escape. Now, as I sit here, writing this, I realize that the truth was always there, hidden in plain sight. My family, my bloodline, we were never ordinary. We were marked, cursed to wander the spaces. And soon you will be too. Because once you know the truth, it never lets you go. The darkness felt eternal. Time no longer had meaning. There was no day, no night. Just an endless void where my ancestors and I existed, trapped between worlds. I wandered through it, following shadows that whispered fragments of our family's past. Each whisper, each flicker of their faces, revealed another part of the curse. It was ancient, buried deep in our blood, and there was no undoing it. But in that desolate place, something began to change. At first, it was subtle, a shift in the air, a distant hum, like the world itself was vibrating. Then, I started to feel it inside me, pulsing through my veins. The bloodline, the curse, whatever it was waking up. And it wanted out. One night, or what I assumed was night, I felt the pull again. The same icy grip that had dragged me into the attic, that had shown me the mirror and the faces of my father and uncle. This time, it was stronger, almost unbearable, like invisible hands pulling at my very soul. The darkness around me shifted, and I could feel myself being torn away from the void. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in cold sweat. I was back in my bed, in my childhood home, but the atmosphere was suffocating. The room was pitch black, and the walls seemed to hum with energy, almost like they were vibrating with the weight of whatever was inside them. I could feel something or someone watching me, but the most terrifying part was that I knew I wasn't alone. My family, the ones I had seen in the void, were still with me. Their presence clung to me, like shadows that wouldn't let go. I could hear them whispering, their voices overlapping in a maddening chorus that echoed inside my skull. It's time. You must complete what we could not. My heart raced, the words filling me with a fear I couldn't shake. What did they mean? Complete what? I tried to speak, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat. My body was frozen, paralyzed by their presence. Then the house began to creak. It was subtle at first, like the old wood shifting under pressure, but soon the noise grew louder, more intense. The floorboards groaned under invisible footsteps, and the walls trembled. Something was coming. From the corner of the room, a shadow began to take form. It was darker than anything I had ever seen, a figure made of pure blackness that seemed to devour the light around it. Slowly, it stepped forward, and as it did, the whispers in my head grew louder, more desperate. I recognized the figure immediately. It was my uncle, or what was left of him. You have to finish it, he rasped, his voice barely human. Before it consumes you. Finish what? I managed to croak, my voice trembling. The curse, he replied, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It was never meant to be passed on. But we failed. Now it's your turn. You must break it. I didn't understand. How was I supposed to break something that had existed for generations? The curse wasn't just some simple spell. It was woven into our very existence. My uncle took another step forward, his face barely visible in the gloom, but his eyes, they burned with a strange intensity. There's a way, he whispered, in the place where it began. You know where? Suddenly, images flashed in my mind. Old, decaying buildings, a forest shrouded in fog, and a door. An ancient door, covered in symbols I didn't recognize, buried deep beneath the earth. I knew the place. I had been there before as a child, though I had no memory of it until that moment. The family estate. The one my grandmother used to tell stories about, the original house, long abandoned, hidden deep in the woods. It had been in our family for centuries, but no one had set foot there in decades. My grandmother had always warned us to stay away, saying it was cursed, that it held the darkest part of our family's history. I thought it was just another one of her ghost stories, something to keep the children in line. But now I knew it was real. And it was waiting for me. Go, my uncle hissed, his form flickering, becoming less solid. It's the only way. Break the chain or it will take you too. I wanted to refuse, to deny the truth, but I couldn't escape it. The pull inside me, the strange energy in my blood, was growing stronger by the second. I knew I had no choice. The curse wouldn't stop. It wouldn't rest until I either broke it or became a part of it. Without another word, my uncle's form dissolved into the shadows, and the room fell silent once more. But the weight of his words lingered, heavy and unshakable. I had to go back to the estate. The drive out to the family estate was long and filled with a sense of foreboding. The deeper I went into the woods, the darker the sky became, as if the very land was rejecting the idea of light. Trees loomed over the narrow dirt road, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. By the time I reached the gates, the sun had completely vanished, leaving me in a world of shadows. The gates were rusted, covered in vines that had grown wild over the years. Beyond them, the estate was barely visible, shrouded in thick fog. The house itself was massive, more like a crumbling mansion than the small cottage I had expected. Its windows were broken, and the roof sagged in places, as if the house itself had been weighed down by the centuries of secrets it held. I pushed open the gates, the metal screeching in protest, and made my way toward the house. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was trying to pull me down, to stop me from reaching the truth. But I couldn't turn back now. I had come too far. When I reached the front door, it creaked open on its own, as if it had been waiting for me. The inside of the house was worse than I had imagined. Dust coated everything, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. But there was something else, too. Presence. It was faint, but I could feel it, watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. I made my way through the house, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The floorboards creaked beneath me, and the walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Then I saw it, the door from my visions. I reached out and touched the door, and immediately the whispers returned. But this time they weren't just voices. They were screams, cries of pain, of terror, of anguish. My hand trembled, but I knew there was no turning back. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Beyond it was a staircase leading down into the earth. The air grew colder with each step I took, the darkness pressing in on all sides. The further I descended, the louder the whispers became, until they were deafening. And then, at the bottom of the stairs, I saw it, the source of it all. A circle, carved into the stone floor, glowing faintly in the darkness. In the center of the circle lay an old, weathered book. The symbols on its cover matched the ones I had seen on the door. This was it, the heart of the curse, the place where it had all begun. I knelt down, my hands shaking as I reached for the book. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, how to break something so ancient, so powerful. But as my fingers brushed the cover, the whispers stopped. Silence. And then, a voice. Not my uncle's, not my father's, but something older, something darker. This is your fate. You are bound to it, as we all are. The room seemed to close in on me, the shadows growing darker, more suffocating. The curse wasn't just something I could break. It was alive, a part of me, of all of us. I gripped the book tighter, my mind racing. There had to be a way. There had to be something I could do to end this. But as I opened the book and stared at the pages, filled with symbols and writing I couldn't understand, I realized the terrible truth. I wasn't here to break the curse. I was here to fulfill it. The truth hit me like a wave, crashing over every hope I had left. The whispers, the visions, the strange pull I had felt all along. It was leading me to this moment, not to break the curse, but to seal my place in it. I had been drawn here to continue the cycle, just as my ancestors had done before me. As I stared at the open book, its pages filled with symbols too ancient to comprehend, a deep sense of dread settled over me. The whispers in the air were gone now, replaced by an overwhelming silence, as if the house itself was waiting for me to make my next move. But I could feel something, a presence, watching, waiting just beyond the veil of reality. The curse was alive, and it had been waiting for me all along. I ran my fingers over the brittle, yellowed pages. The ink seemed to pulse under my touch, almost as if it were alive, and the symbols began to shift, writhing across the paper like serpents. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, and a low rumble echoed through the stone walls of the underground chamber. I could feel the presence growing stronger, rising from the depths, and I knew that if I didn't do something, if I didn't act now, it would consume me, just like it had consumed all those who came before me. The darkness thickened, pressing in from all sides. I needed to get out. I needed to escape before whatever it was fully awakened. But as I turned to run, I realized the door was gone. The staircase had vanished, replaced by solid stone. I was trapped. In the oppressive silence, a voice echoed through the chamber. Deep, hollow, and ancient. You are part of this now. The sound vibrated through my bones, filling me with a terror unlike anything I had ever felt. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing. Only shadows, swirling and writhing in the dim light of the chamber. You were always meant to come here, the voice continued, closer now, more insistent. It is in your blood. You cannot escape what you are. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. What am I? I shouted, my voice trembling. What do you want from me? The shadows in the room shifted, twisting into a form I recognized all too well. My uncle. He stood before me, his face pale and expressionless, but his eyes burned with an unnatural light. You were chosen, he said, his voice cold and distant, just as I was, just as your father was. The bloodline calls us back, generation after generation. We are bound to it, forever. I shook my head, refusing to believe what I was hearing. No, there has to be a way out. There has to be a way to stop this. There is no escape, my uncle replied, his voice hollow. The curse is not something you can break. It is part of you, part of all of us. The only way to free yourself is to give in to it. Embrace it. Complete the ritual. As he spoke, the shadows around him began to shift again, and more figures emerged. My father, my grandmother, faces of ancestors I had never known but recognized all the same. They surrounded me, their eyes empty, their bodies flickering like ghosts in a storm. You are the last, my father's voice echoed, a deep sadness in his tone. The curse must be passed on. The bloodline must continue. I shook my head, backing away from the circle of shadows. No, I won't do it. The air was thick with their presence, and I could feel their will bearing down on me, an unbearable weight. The book in my hands began to glow faintly, the symbols on the cover burning into my skin. It was calling to me, pulling me toward the center of the circle, where a small altar stood, ancient, carved with the same strange markings that covered the book. I realized then that this was the heart of it all. This was where the curse was bound, where it had all begun. And I was the key. I dropped the book, my hands trembling. I don't want this, I whispered, my voice barely audible. But the figures surrounding me didn't respond. They only watched, waiting, their empty eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I could feel the curse in my veins, thrumming with dark energy, pulling me toward the altar. It was as if the bloodline itself was calling to me, demanding that I complete the ritual, that I fulfill my role in this twisted cycle. In a moment of clarity, I realized that they were right. The curse couldn't be broken. It was too old, too deeply woven into the fabric of our family. But I didn't have to continue it. I didn't have to give in. With shaking hands, I stepped toward the altar, not out of submission, but out of defiance. The book lay on the stone surface, its pages glowing faintly. The symbols were alive now, writhing across the pages, but I didn't need to understand them. I knew what I had to do. I raised my hand over the book, feeling the dark energy coursing through my body. The shadows pressed in around me, my ancestors watching in silent anticipation. But I wasn't going to follow their path. I wasn't going to let the curse win. With a final breath, I slammed the book shut and threw it to the ground, the sound echoing through the chamber. The shadows around me recoiled, the figures flickering and fading as if my defiance had weakened them. The ground beneath me shook violently, and the altar began to crack, fissures spreading across the stone floor like veins. The air was filled with a terrible roar, as if the curse itself was screaming in fury. For a moment I thought I had succeeded. The dark presence that had filled the chamber seemed to weaken, the shadows retreating. But then, from the cracks in the floor, something began to rise. A figure, darker than the shadows, its form shifting and flickering like smoke. It wasn't my uncle or my father or any of the ancestors I had seen. This something far more dangerous. It was the curse itself, the true heart of the darkness that had plagued my family for generations. "You cannot defy me," it hissed, its voice like nails on glass. "The bloodline is mine. You are mine." I stepped back, my heart racing as the figure advanced. Its form twisted and stretched, growing larger, more menacing. The room was collapsing around me, the walls crumbling as the darkness closed in. I realized then that there was no escaping it. I had tried to break the cycle, but the curse was too powerful, too deeply rooted in my blood. It wasn't something that could be destroyed, not like this. But maybe it could be contained. The book lay at my feet, still glowing faintly despite the chaos around it. I didn't know how, but I knew that the book was the key. It had always been the key. If I couldn't destroy the curse, I could trap it, bind it to the book, just as my ancestors had done before me. With a final burst of strength, I lunged toward the book, slamming my hand onto the cover. The figure screamed, its voice filling the chamber with a deafening roar, but I didn't let go. I could feel the curse pulling at me, trying to drag me into the darkness, but I held on, pouring every ounce of willpower I had left into the book. The shadows surged toward me, the figure reaching out with long, twisted fingers, but just as it touched me, everything went still. The book snapped shut with a thunderous crack, and the darkness vanished. I collapsed onto the stone floor, gasping for breath. The chamber was silent once more, the oppressive energy gone. The curse, it was gone. Or at least it was bound again, sealed inside the book where it belonged. I don't know how long I lay there, my body aching, my mind reeling. But eventually, I stood, my legs trembling beneath me. The figures, my ancestors, were gone. Their presence faded into nothingness. The house, the curse, the bloodline. It had all been bound to the book. But I knew the truth. It wasn't over. Not really. The curse was still there, waiting dormant. Bound for now, but never truly broken. As I left the estate, I took the book with me. I had to. I couldn't let it stay there, where someone else might find it, where the curse could start again. I would keep it safe, hidden away where it couldn't hurt anyone. But deep down, I knew that as long as it existed, the curse would never truly be gone.